Welcome back, wannabes and creators, to another episode of The Business of Art, the podcast that demystifies business for artists. Today's show, I'm excited to have Hope Larson. Hope is one of the few artists that I've ever met who works for both DC and traditional publishers. So I am super excited to have her on to talk about navigating the murky waters of traditional publishing, editing, being a full-time artist, and more. But before we do, I want to extend an invitation to you to join my Facebook group, Artists and Creators Making Money Selling Books. Look, it's completely free, and all it's going to do is help you make more money. So I guess it's the opposite free, but in the good way, where eventually you'll make money from the thing instead of pay money for it. So head on over to writingandsellingcommunity.com and join our group today. It's free. The people are cool. We've got over 500 members, and we would like you to be one of them. All right, with that being said, let's get on with the show. Take it away, Hope. Tell us what you're passionate about these days.
Right now, I'm pretty passionate about more commercial storytelling. So, Batgirl would fall into that space, which I've been having a really great time writing. And honestly, I feel like Compass South and Knife's Edge, which are my Pyro books, are kind of in that adventure-y, easily digestible space. So that's the kind of stuff that I'm excited to make right now. Okay, so just to back up a little bit, I got on this track after doing Wrinkle in Time. And I was hearing from a lot of parents and I guess friends of children that A Wrinkle in Time was the first book a lot of kids had read on their own. So reluctant readers, kids who had a really hard time just reading books at all, were connecting with this book. And I wanted to make more stuff that was fun and exciting and filled with adventure that kids who felt shut out by reading would be able to connect with. So that's what I'm passionate about, and that's what I'm excited to be making right now.
Yeah, I'll say, as someone who read your Chiggers book and other a little bit older works of yours, and then someone who's read Wrinkle in Time, Compass South, The Batgirl, it does feel a little bit like Wrinkle in Time was like a transition to like a much more not that there wasn't a through line or story in Chiggers, but like much more like developed 3-act structure.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing that happened was that I really went back and basically learned how to be a better writer and learned how to make stories propulsive and exciting. Because I didn't study writing ever, not in school. I went to art school, so I studied printmaking and figure drawing and stuff like that. And I'm completely self-taught in the writing aspect of things.
So what did you do in order to sort of learn the writing skill?
I read a lot of articles online, and I read some books, and I listened to some podcasts. There used to be a great one, and it may still be around. I can't remember the name of it, but it was with screenwriters, and they would sit down with the screenwriters of different movies and just really break down the process of writing those things. And I learned a whole lot just from listening to that. I also, when I was going through this whole process of learning how to write more commercially, was living in Los Angeles and just made friends with a lot of writers, screenwriters, YA novelists, people like that in LA. Film Crit Hulk is a good friend of mine, and he's been really helpful in sort of mentoring me almost and helping me figure out the weak spots in my writing and how I could address those.
Excellent. Yeah, I think that too often as artists or even comic book or novel writers, we tend to stay too close in our bubble. Like we look at other comic writers or comic artists, or so the fact that you kind of branched out and instead of just looking at comics or novels, you looked at a whole wide range of writing to kind of improve is a great lesson for everybody that's listening.
Oh yeah, I'm always learning. I'm always looking for new tricks that I can use in my own work.
I love that you use the word tricks because like I feel like the last decade of my life has been doing the same thing. I started as a TV writer that moved into doing comics, that moved into doing novels, and every time I've transitioned to doing something else, I'm like, oh, I can just go into this toolbox of like all of this awesome stuff that I learned as a TV writer and port it to comics and then port it to novels. And then as I learned more about novels or more about playwrights or whatever, I can port all of that stuff and make myself a better screenwriter and like all have it sort of commingled. Do you find the same thing happens for you as well?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the thing about those tricks is it's all for me most of it is just transitions and how you link scenes together. And the button therefore thing, that's a huge one.
Right. There's a big. You're talking about it's been around forever, but I think Trey Parker and
Yeah,
Matt Stone made it famous, right?
exactly.
Yeah. Could you explain a little bit for the audience that doesn't know what that is?
Yeah, I always have the worst time explaining this, so feel free to jump in. But basically, your you want your scene to end with either a well, or I guess okay, let's see. Sorry, backing up.
You
You
wanted to make sure that at the end it goes, and therefore this happens, and therefore this happens, and therefore this happens, instead of just being like
you either want your scene to end with your characters having a clear direction into the next scene. For example, they're going to a new location to accomplish whatever, or you want the scene that follows it to subvert that.
right. Yes, that's a really good explanation, and I promise I'll link the much better, more thought out, thorough explanation that Trey and Matt had in the comments to this section. Because they explain it in like 5 minutes, and I was like, oh my God, that's everything that I want to say when I talk about but therefore, and just can't do
Yeah,
it.
it's such a simple idea, but so hard to get across somehow.
Right, exactly. And but what they do amazingly in that is they just use how their stories at how South Park works are different than how all other comedies work. And you're like, oh my God, that is totally different. I never even noticed that because it like underneath all the dick and fart jokes, there's like a real story
Yeah.
structure thing there.
Yeah. And anyway, it's like I feel like I've just been racking up a whole bunch of little tricks like that. And the thing is, they just work. You kind of, when you first start applying this stuff to your work, you feel like you're pulling one over on people a little bit. But those are just the rules of storytelling. It's just how it functions.
Right, and you have to know the rules to like kind of break the rules or to know what rule to use in a specific place,
Exactly.
right? I mean, I have drawn a book before, but I am not an artist, and I assume it's probably similar to when you're drawing a book as well, right? Where like everyone looks and goes, "Oh my God, that's incredible." And it's like it's really just like 3 lines this way, but like you keep telling me it's
Yeah.
incredible. That's what I
Yeah.
want. So can we talk a little bit about your history and how you got up to this point where you're now writing? You're now writing and working with DC. You're doing more commercial books. I would just love to hear a little bit about the backstory from like art school, let's say, to now in a couple of
Sure.
minutes.
I've been a comics fan for most of my life. I really first got into comics when I was 7, 8 years old, and my dad is a professor, and he moved the family over to France for a year when I was 7 because he was on sabbatical and translating this book. And my parents thought it would be a great experience for me and my brother to live in France. So we didn't know any French, my brother and I. My parents knew French. They just kind of tossed us in the local village school, and we had to sink or swim, which I think is a good experience to have. And when you're that age, you sort of just roll with it. But anyway, France has a huge comics culture, and my parents were willing to buy me lots of comic books because they helped with my French comprehension. So I got to read a ton of Tintin, Asterix. They had My Little Pony comics, which were very different from the ones that we have now. And I just read all of that stuff. then when we came back to the US a year later, all that was really available was superhero comics, and I wasn't into those at the time. So I kind of stopped reading comics until high school. And then I discovered manga and became a huge manga anime nerd. And then I got into indie comics from there. So I was reading like a lot of Dan Clowes and Chris Ware. That continued through college. I was mostly reading comics at that point. I was making very artsy book arts projects in art school at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, but they weren't really comics. So the way that I actually got into making comics was that Scott McCloud found my online portfolio of illustrations and stuff that I was pretty much doing for fun for myself and for my friends. And he encouraged me to start making comics. And it just, he encouraged me on his blog, which opened all of these doors right away. I got connected to Kazuo Kibishi and Kinsu and all the guys who are doing the Flight anthology, Vera Brasgel, Raina Telgemeier, Jen Wang, just, all the people who are making amazing graphic novels now. They were all just starting out too. So it was kind of this incubator for cartoonists, really. And from there, one thing just led to another. I moved to Toronto because I got married, and I couldn't get a job for a while because I was waiting for my green card to come through. So I ended up writing and drawing Salamander Dream, which was my first graphic novel. And once you make a graphic novel, it's sort of one thing just leads to the next. Comics is a very welcoming industry.
It really is, and I have found that in my own life. Like once you make the one thing, it leads to the next thing and the next thing, and they just keep building and building and building.
Yeah,
on each other.
And it basically just keeps building unless you're like, I can't do it anymore, and you quit. If you can stick it out, it mostly seems to keep building. So I did a couple of books for small publishers, and then I moved over to Simon & Schuster and was working with Jeannie So at Jeannie So Books, which was an imprint of Athenaeum Books for Young Readers. She was incredible. I did Chiggers and Mercury with her. And she taught me so much about being a writer and just working with a team and what a good editor is like. She was really incredible. Then she got fired and her imprint got shut down. And it was sort of like dark days for the publishing industry and dark days for me too, because I wasn't really sure what the future of my career was going to look like. Then I got A Wrinkle in Time basically out of the blue. I was contacted by the editor on the project, Margaret Ferguson, who's still my editor. And she just emailed me. She like cold called me basically, asking if I would be interested in adapting A Wrinkle in Time into a graphic novel. And I remember being in my office and just staring at this email and going, there's no way this is real. This is like crazy. Because that book was a huge deal for me when I was growing up. And it was real. So I did that. It was really hard. I pretty much burned myself out on drawing because it was 2 years of just solid drawing. And the book is 400 pages long.
Amazing 400
Thank
pages.
you. I mean, I'm so glad I did it. But at the time, it was just like really nerve-wracking because it's the novel's a classic and people have a very strong connection to it. And it's that whole thing of every time a classic is adapted, people are afraid that you're ruining their childhood or that you're not going to be respectful of the work. So people were really upset when the book was announced. And I was like, oh my God, I'm spending 2 years on this thing and people are going to be mad at me. They're going to hate it. And like, what's going to happen? And that didn't happen. I mean, the reception was really warm and kind, which is a huge relief.
And how did that book help bring in new readers to your old material? Did it?
I'm actually not sure that it did because I had switched publishers. So my other books were at Simon & Schuster and they kind of were promoting them because I left for a different publisher, and that's a touchy thing in the industry.
Right.
So
So
yeah, who knows? Anyway,
who knows?
yeah, so From Wrinkle in Time, that book did well. And that opened the door for me to sell Compass South and Knife's Edge, which are my historical pirate adventure books. And I'd been wanting to do an adventure type book like Tintin and like Asterix, those books that I first read when I started reading comics for years. And I was like, okay, my publisher likes me, the book is doing well, I can push these things through now while I have this cachet. And I did that. And yeah.
That's one of the most fascinating things when I talk to writers and artists about selling, about who work at with bigger publishers. They're like, okay, I'm using the cachet now to get this book that I probably couldn't do a year before, and I might not be able to do a year after, but like I'm riding this high so I can sell the thing that I
Exactly.
want now.
You have to be super strategic about that stuff.
How did you develop sort of this strategic mindset for I'm assuming based on what your history was, it wasn't something that came supernaturally for the person that was doing art, like weird art prints in college?
No. I have to give a lot of credit to my agent, Judy Hansen, who was the agent on Flight and offered to represent or to look at the projects of any of the artists connected to Flight. She ended up liking my pitch for Chiggers, and we've been working together ever since. So a lot of what I know about publishing and how to approach publishing, I've learned from her. That's pretty much it. And, you just sort of get a sense for it after you've been around for a while. And you pitch stuff and it doesn't sell, and you're like, but I thought it was good. And then you sort of start to understand what the market wants and what publishers want and what editors want. And you may have an amazing book with no audience. That doesn't mean it's not an amazing book. It just means that it's not really for the mainstream or for the market.
You're right, exactly. So if you could go to Little Hope before she had even gotten the Flight anthology, or when she was starting to pitch stories and she didn't know really like what to pitch or what was good, what would you tell her to improve her chances of selling a story today? Is there like one big takeaway that you've improved over the past, like, I don't know, 20 years of doing pitches that like you're really like, okay, if I was gonna pitch a project today and I had to tell Hope from her first pitch like what she definitely shouldn't do, what would that be?
Yeah, I would probably tell Little Hope to study structure more, like 3-act structure and just how stories fit together, because that's something I still struggle with a little bit today. And I think I have more of an intuitive approach to it. And I kind of wish that I'd spent more time breaking stuff down earlier on.
Is that feedback that you had gotten from editors, or just something that you'd learned from hard
No,
experience?
just from experience mostly.
And okay, so let's go back for a second to the Flight anthology. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so you got did you pitch a story to them, or what? How did the process of getting into this anthology work?
We had a message board, and all of the writers and artists, and I think it was basically cartoonists. I don't know if there were actually writer-artist teams on that book. I think it was all cartoonists. There was a message board, and we posted our ideas and roughs. And I don't know that there was ever really a point where we were pitching them. It was kind of just like, I'm doing this. And everybody would just be supportive.
So were you like invited in, and then it was basically like free reign to do whatever you wanted to do?
In my memory, that's what it was like.
Yep.
It was a long time ago.
Well, the reason I ask is that a lot of our audience is trying to get into doing anthologies and either creating their own anthology or trying to pitch to other people's anthologies. So I'm always curious for people that have worked with anthologies, like what was your experience in that anthology, and if you could go back and do it again, is there something that you would do differently?
My experience with anthologies has usually been the editors are so grateful that people are even getting their work in, getting their pages in at all, that you pretty much have carte blanche to do what you want. But I don't know. Is that what it's like for other people?
Well, I mean, as an editor of an anthology, I can say that I was so excited that people got their pages in on time that I did give them carte blanche to do just about anything as long as they got the pages. I only had one rule, or two rules. Like your thing has to have monsters in it, and it has to be in by this date. If you can get
Hmm.
those two things in and no like sexy time things, like keep it like you can do a hard R but no sex. Like you can do those three things, like your thing will run because
Yeah.
but keeping the train moving on time for those things is so important, which is like why my best advice to tell people is like, yes, your art is important, but really, if you can just be on time in an anthology, like you're gonna be so ahead of the game.
Yeah. I mean, the way that I look at anthologies is that they're like these training grounds for younger artists, and I'm not even sure that it makes that much sense to impose a strong editorial hand on them because that's not. I think most people who even read anthologies in the first place are looking for the weird new voice, the undiscovered voice.
Yeah, and I think that people that that read anthologies are also kind of have a 20-20-60 mentality where like 20% of this stuff I'm gonna love, 20% of this stuff is probably gonna be like barely a story, and I'll just be happy if I can get through it, and then like 60 I'm going to enjoy, but not thing ever.
60% that you'll enjoy seems safe for an
Really?
anthology.
I, I
Yeah. I would say like a third
You
probably.
think in your experience a third are good? Like how many of them are like mind
Yeah.
blowing in
Like 1 to 2
one to two
stories.
stories?
Well, I guess like, but what percent of an anthology is that? I don't know.
Right. And
5%.
then like how many of it is just like God, please let this story be over?
Um,
Like
Probably like a third.
okay. That's cool. That's so like a third of it is like okay. And you know what's weird about an anthology is that third that you're like God will let this be over. I talked to another person and that's their favorite stories.
Yeah. But that's why you read
Right,
those
exactly,
things.
and that's why we did $27,000 and 600 backers on our last anthology that we're doing, and it was so weird to talk to people and hear their favorite ones. I mean, some of them were consistent across the board, but
Hmm.
then there were ones that I was like, this really isn't my favorite one, and people would be like, no, that's the best one. I'm like, oh, cool. I'll be like, that's my favorite one, and they'd be like, oh, that one, like the eye roll, and they wouldn't even like do the eye roll. It'd be such a big eye roll that they had to actually say it out loud. So that's I don't know how we got to this tangent of anthologies, but since we both have done anthologies, I guess that's just where the conversation goes. Okay,
Yeah.
so can we talk a little bit about DC for a second and how that happened
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
how
Yeah.
I like. I don't read DC comics. I don't read Marvel comics either, but I bought one trade in the past several years of DC, and it was Batgirl Beyond Burnside.
Woo,
Was
thank
the only
you.
thing that I bought from DC in years. So and it was great. So can you talk a little bit about how
Thanks.
you moved from working on like a traditional book publisher to working at DC?
Yeah. So pretty much what happened was that I was introduced to Rebecca Taylor, who is one of my editors on Batgirl. And we had lunch and we kind of hit it off. And I was invited to pitch a short story for Gotham Academy yearbook. And that went really well. So from there, Tay and Mark Doyle, who is the head Bat editor, invited me to pitch on Batgirl for Rebirth. And they had an idea for Batgirl taking like a backpacking trip and going overseas. And I was like, that sounds really cool. So I wrote a take based on that and sent it in, and they went for it. That's pretty much the story.
But it started in a very in kind of the way that most of these pitches go, where like you pitch to the yearbook or whatever the anthology is at the end of the year. Seems to be a pretty traditional way that DC and Marvel find new talent.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I don't really know because I don't think I've talked to anybody else about how they got into DC.
Well,
I certainly had no idea of how to get into DC myself, or I would have probably tried to do it earlier.
Did that help you with I know you had with your story progression and progressing as a writer, did working for DC help, or like how did that play into your desire now to do more commercial stuff?
It definitely helped. I mean, I already had the manuscript for Compass South when I was pitching on this, and I think it helped them to see that I could write action because I already had this project that I'd been working on that was in kind of a similar space. And working on, DC has been awesome and just so brutal. And I mean that in a good way because it's a monthly book, so it's a grind. I have to write one of those things every month, which is really hard. I mean, 20 pages a month doesn't sound like a big deal, but that's not like your only job.
Right. Well, it's also not just 20 pages of like random stuff. It's like it has to connect in continuity with like other things in the future, right?
Yeah. So there's an arc. Usually what I do is I outline the arc, which is like 4 to 6 issues. And then I'm working from a framework.
Are you thinking more than the one arc ahead or just that one arc? And then like you just figure out the next one in the future?
We usually have some ideas for future arcs, but by the time you get to the end of the arc that you're writing, usually things have changed so much just within like the DCU and what everybody else is doing that sometimes the plans that you've made just are not going to work anymore and you can't go that direction. You've gotten like blocked off by the stories that other people are telling.
Right. How much time do you spend kind of like molding your continuity to the rest of the DCU continuity?
Not a ton. Usually the where you run into problems is with other characters that you want to use. So like if I want to use Poison Ivy in an arc, that has to go in line with whoever else is doing with Poison Ivy. So it all has to get clear.
Right.
And that's where it's tricky. And same thing with like villains. If somebody's using this obscure villain you want to use, you can't use them. Especially if that person is more important than you at DC, right?
Right, of course. Like there's a pecking order.
Yeah, there's a pecking order. But for the most part, because Batgirl is kind of like, it's kind of a weird book with its own little audience. So I feel like a little bit shielded from events and stuff like that. And I can do more or less the kind of thing that I want to be doing.
Yeah, that's great. That's always what I would have hoped to be on like on a DC book if I were ever to do it. It's like I don't like that whole big story like doesn't appeal to me, but doing something in like what you're doing sounds like a much more sort of indie thing inside of a big commercial.
Yeah, that's pretty much what it is. I think the closest I came to doing something that was like a little bit more eventy was the annual, which was a crossover with Supergirl. And for that one, we had to get I got notes from my editors in the Bat office. I got notes from the Superman office, and I got notes from the TV show, the Supergirl TV show. And that issue. It turned out really well and I'm really happy with it, but it's one of the few times when I've had to do an almost complete rewrite on something just because of like political stuff and because I had to line up with all the other incarnations of like super.
Yeah, that sounds not as fun as just doing your
It
thing.
was not as fun, but it was still fun and it was a cool experience to
All
have.
right, awesome. Well, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about something that I'm sure that everyone in my audience wants to hear about, which is how you have had a very long, well, a relatively long career working with big editors and big companies and on multiple successful books, not just in one like in one series, and pitching to multiple houses. How have you been able to sustain that over the long haul? And like, if you could give a couple of tips to people that are looking to work at bigger, established publishing houses and just keep that sustainability and keep putting out book after book after book, like what would you tell somebody that's looking to get into a path similar to yours?
Ooh, wow. I have so much to say on this topic, and I feel like I'm just going to ramble all over the place.
Oh
Um,
my God, please ramble. You can talk about this forever,
yeah.
ramble. This is what my audience wants to hear about.
Okay. So I have never had another career except for comics. I started doing this out of college. This is really all I know. I had like I was a video clerk in college and I worked as a cashier at PetSmart, and those are the jobs that I had before I got into comics. So I don't recommend that as a career path. Comics pays really poorly and it's very labor intensive. And I love it so much and I'm so glad that things have worked out. But I've had years where I basically couldn't get jobs, like nobody wanted to buy the projects I was trying to sell, or like I was in between, or I was waiting for my advance to come through or whatever. And sometimes you wait for months and months, and it's really terrifying because when you get all of your money paid in like thirds throughout a project, and you don't really know when that money's coming in. It's so stressful and so nightmarish. This is one of the reasons that I ended up working for DC and was so excited to work for DC, because when you're writing a monthly book, you're getting paid every month. And this is the first time in my adult life that I've gotten paid on a regular basis. So that's been a huge load off my mind. I really recommend that if folks can get on a monthly book, if that's like okay for your mental health and your schedule, I think it's a good thing. But I also really recommend that you cultivate kind of career outside comics, because not only does comics pay well and pay at weird intervals, a lot of contracts that you sign will have non-compete clauses in them. So, for example, I'm mostly working for our Strauss and Giroux, which is an imprint of Macmillan right now. I can't just go out and sell a book to whoever I want because I'd be in violation of my contract. That becomes a problem when you're doing a book for your publisher and you don't have enough money to get by, but you can't do the thing that is your job, which is writing books, because you can't sell a book to anybody else because you'd be violating your contract. So you really need an alternate revenue stream. So, um,
I want to keep talking
yeah.
about this, but could you explain a little bit about paying in thirds for people that may
Oh,
not know how
yeah,
this
sure.
works?
Usually when you sell a book, you get paid a third on signing. So when you sign the contract. And by the way, on signing can be quite a while after you do your like handshake deal to sell the book. You may have this book and you submit it to the publisher and the publisher's like, yeah, we want it. But then it may take like 6 months, 8 months, a year to actually sign that contract. And you're not getting paid until after that contract is signed. Lawyers and agents have to do all that negotiation. So you get a third on signing, a third on delivery of the script, usually is the way that it is in my contract. Yours might be different. And then a third on delivery of the final art. So you're getting 2/3 basically while you're working on the book, and 1/3 after the book is completely finished and into the publisher, which is scary, right?
Yeah, because the drawing of the book is like 2 years of time, right? Could be.
Yeah, could be. It could be longer. It could be less. And I more and more I'm working with other artists at this point. So take the advance, cut it in half. Or, like I pay my agent too. So take the advance and take
And lawyer
away 10 or
fees.
15%, then cut what's left in half. Yeah, plus taxes. You see very how the advance that may look like a not bad advance gets whittled down to almost
And it has to
nothing.
last you for like
The however
however long
long
it takes.
it takes you
And
to
one
make
thing
the
that I
book.
learned recently was like I was talking to my friend who works for Random House about how I was like, okay, so how many revisions did they get? And he's like, what do you mean? And I'm like, well, like when you sell a script, they get like 2 revisions and then they pay you more after a revision. He's like, oh, they just like however long they want, however many revisions that they ask for. And
Yeah, however many
yeah,
it takes. I would say like 10
that is
over the
that
course
is
of
a
a book.
crazy amount of revisions for some. Like again, I live in LA. I know you lived in LA. So most people that I know for a long time have been screenwriters or comic book people. Comic book people are used to like self-publishing often, and
Hmm.
script people are used to being like I do 2 revisions and then they pay me every other revision. So like they pay me or they like tell me to go screw off. And then my friend who just moved from like doing screenwriting a lot to doing novels a lot was like, yeah, they don't do that. They just like here's the money and like eventually like it'll go out, I guess, if we like it enough.
Yeah.
That is insane to me.
Yeah, but you have to like look at it this way, which is when you're a screenwriter, you're hired to do a job, right? But when you're making a book, you're making your book. You're like the director and the producer and the screenwriter. And you're making the thing that you want to make, not really the thing that the publisher or the studio wants to make. Hopefully.
And hopefully you get residuals or royalties on that into the distant future once it's done.
Yeah. Most of my books haven't earned out. I think that the pirate ones will. Wrinkle in Time has earned out, and now I get money from that a couple times a year, which is cool. But none of my other books have earned out.
Can you talk about
Yeah,
earning out
earning
for a
out means
second?
that the publisher has made back the money that it paid you on your advance, and you start earning royalties on the sales of the book.
Because the advance is not actually like them paying extra. They're just paying you a percent. Like they're paying you in advance for royalties in the
Yeah,
future, right?
exactly. So
Okay, sorry, that
no,
was a bit of a
that's fine.
tangent,
Yeah, I
but
get royalty statements from all my publishers that tell me just how many copies of my book has sold and how far away I am from from starting to make royalties in the future.
that's
They're
a very passive
depressing.
aggressive.
Yeah.
But not. But sometimes they'll earn out, and you'll be like, "That's
That
amazing."
yeah,
Like so
it
now
is
with
amazing.
Wrinkle in Time, you're like, give me that commission, the royalty
Yeah, it
statement."
feels like free money. It's great. It just shows up. You're like, "Oh my God." And you don't really get that on screenwriting, right? Like you sell the thing and it's sold and that's it.
You would be, from my experience, you get something from the Writers Guild, from the
Oh, okay.
like they negotiate a piece of the contract, I guess. I mean, I heard this story from David Hayter, where like he got paid, I guess, WG for X-Men for like 75,000, I think it was at that time, and then like because he was the only sole credited writer on the book, he got some percentage of all the money, and he ended up with like $900,000 the
What?
next year. Which is nice when you're David Hayter. I mean, that usually doesn't happen, and like usually your screenwriters aren't writing WGA stuff
Hmm.
anyway. So anyway, that's something that neither of us know like especially a lot about. I want to talk about the thing you know more about, which is talking about like your experiences as a published writer over a long
Right.
career.
So let's see. Just to like go back onto my rambly train of thought again. Uh, I just moved to North Carolina from Los Angeles. I was in Los Angeles for 7 years. And basically what happened over the course of my stay in LA, was that I got divorced and I fell into a difficult financial patch of basically I wasn't getting enough work to live on. And I was going through my savings and it was really scary. And then I had this whole like when it rains it pours period where I was writing Goldie Vance for Boom. I was writing Batgirl for DC. I was drawing a graphic novel. This was last year. This was last year. This was 2016. So I was writing 2 monthly books and I was drawing a 170 something page graphic novel. And I almost died. It was so much work, plus doing conventions and all that stuff. So it was, and I'm so glad I had all those opportunities. You can't really say no to them because you don't know when they're going to come around again. And I look at that year, and I looked at that year at the time as like, I'm just going to work really hard for this year, and I'm gonna build myself in the direct market space, which is the traditional comics space, because they don't really know who I am there. And then I'll be able to build on that foundation in the future at less of a crazy pace. Anyway, that year was really rough. I just got to a point where I was like, I can't do this every year because it will literally kill me. It's not good for my mental health. It's not good for my body. It's not good for my friendships or my relationships. It's just working too hard all the time. So I decided to move back to North Carolina, where I'm from, which is much, much cheaper. And then I can sort of chill out on the work pace a little bit and enjoy my life a little more. And I can't even tell you what a huge relief it is, like every single day, to not have to worry about money constantly. So that's really my big piece of advice is if you can not live in an expensive city, if you have if you can leave and not wreck your career, just do it because you'll be happier.
That's not an uncommon thing that you hear from a lot of people. And I'll say, after seeing you at Comic Arts LA last year, like you look a lot happier now than you did then.
Yeah, I'm definitely happier now. It's a huge load off. But also, like I have to say, it's not just that. It's also the fact that I've been on Batgirl for over a year at this point, and I've sort of learned the ropes. So it's not like I'm not going through that whole new job freak out. How do I do this? I don't really understand how this works. There are all these new rules. It's a whole new industry. I'm not going through that anymore because I've been in it for long enough to adjust.
So being in both, being in like the traditional publishing space and the direct comic market space, how do they operate differently? How are they different from each other?
They're so different. So book publishers is like writing for just your average non-comics fan kid, usually like kids who shop in bookstores or kids who get books from their school library or the public library or whatever. And then the comics direct market is diehard comics fans who've been reading comics their whole lives a lot of the time and are really invested in like their local comic shop. That's part of their routine, going every Wednesday and getting the new books. They're really invested in these characters because they grew up with them. And they love the issue-based format. So it's just so different. And I love librarians and I love teachers and the people that I interact with my graphic novels. And I also have really grown to love the diehard comics fans, honestly, because they're so enthusiastic. They make shows so much more fun because they're excited to like read the new Batgirl or whatever. And they're excited to talk about it. And that's really, it's cool to be part of somebody's life in that way as a writer. It's a hard thing for me to explain.
No, because like with books, like there's not as much staying power as with a comic that's coming out every month and it's come out with that same character forever,
Yeah.
right? I mean, even a book that, I mean, aside for Wrinkle in Time, like all your characters are brand new, completely like from your brain creations, and like your brain creations doesn't have 50, 60, 70 years of history behind it, and like multi-generational, like transmedia formats, like getting people to invest in a character or a scenario from the time that their grandparents were
Yeah,
reading.
I guess what it really comes down to is like brand recognition, which is such a gross way to put it, but it's really nice to have a project where I don't have to really do my song and dance to try and sell somebody on this new story and characters that they've never seen before.
Oh no, I mean that makes complete sense. Like that's the whole point of like our wannabe logo. Because I used to work for
Uh-huh.
Aflac. Do you know Aflac? Like
Yeah,
Aflac,
the
the
duck, yeah.
duck. It's like, you know how much easier it is to go in and talk to somebody about like the thing when they like, oh yeah, Affleck, I get it. Like we can now have a deeper, more meaningful conversation than if I just said I sell supplemental insurance. What the heck supplemental insurance? And then you go on like a 20-minute spiel
Yeah.
about it. Batgirl, you know Batgirl. I'm like, oh yeah, I love Batgirl. Cool. Now let's geek out about Batgirl instead of me having to explain to you for 5 minutes what a Batgirl is.
Yeah, exactly. And it's been like really great to be working on that book when I go in and meet with people in the film and TV space because they know what that is, and I can say, "Oh, I write Batgirl," and a little light goes on in their eyes, and then we can have a conversation because I'm a legitimate person suddenly.
Right, of course. I mean, well, I mean, not to get back into movies and TV, but that's all about like
That's fine.
That's all about
All
brand
roads lead
recognition.
back there,
It's
right?
like the minute that you've sold a thing, it's like I sold that thing, and they're like, oh, well now we'll all meet with you, and you're like, it's the same fucking story that I just was trying to pitch to you for 10 years. And the only difference is
Yeah.
that thing now sold, so now I can sell you this thing.
Yep.
Okay, so I would love to talk with you forever, but I know that your time is valuable. So how about we talk a little bit about what is coming next from you?
Oh, let's see. So next up is Knife's Edge, which is the sequel slash part two of Compass South that comes out at the end of June. So I think June 29th, something like that. I will be at Heroes Con on the Saturday of the show if you're happening to go. Rebecca Mock will be there the whole time. She's the artist on Compass South and Knife's Edge, and we will have copies of the book. So that's the next thing. I am still plugging away on Batgirl, and I have another graphic novel, an original graphic novel that I also drew coming out at some point next year. It's called All Summer Long, and it's a slice of life LA middle grade book. And I also have some stuff I can't talk about, which is really exciting. So stay tuned.
Yay! Yeah,
Yay.
I was confused at Compass South when I went to the end, and I was like, wait, it doesn't end. Like, what's up with this, Hope? Like, where's the next thing? Like, this ain't a comic. Like, but I was like, I want it now, so I'm very excited. I really enjoyed Compass South, and I'm looking forward to Knife's Edge. Is there a one? Well, can you not? Maybe that's something you can't talk about. But like, do you intend to continue it past the second one?
I mean, we'd like to, but it depends on sales and stuff.
Right. Okay, so
Mm-hmm.
is there anything?
So yeah, please buy my book so we can make part
Yeah,
three.
please buy her book and like go back and buy all of the books. And if you see her at a con, she has some of like, I don't know if you still do this, but like the most ridiculously like reasonably priced original art ever. Like, do you still
Oh
do
yeah,
that? Like,
I do. Yeah, I usually lug my solo pages around
yeah,
for like 10, 15
yeah, I was like, it's like
bucks.
I think I got like three for $20 or three for $25, and I was like, wait, these are original pages from like which book? I love that book. What do you? So like,
My webcomic. Oh yeah, I have a very, very slow updating webcomic at solocomic.net. If you like sad breakup stories, that one's for you. I usually do 1 to 2 pages a week if I'm lucky. That's the thing that I do in between all my other stuff.
awesome. And wait, you have like the best Instagram or Twitter handle. I forget what it is.
It's
like
Despair Larson.
Despair Larson, because it's like the opposite of hope. Like,
Yeah, somebody else has Hope Larson, and she won't give it up. So
I like Despair Larson better.
yeah.
Okay, so do you have anything that you'd like to talk about that I haven't asked you about yet?
I don't think so. I think we covered it pretty well.
Awesome, awesome. Okay, so last thing, one piece of advice you haven't given so far where we can find you online, and then we'll say goodbye.
I'm really struggling on the piece of advice. I feel like I gave my good advice.
You can reiterate something that you said before. You know, people have been tuned out for the past 30 minutes as they've been doing other stuff. So this is where you get them back.
Okay, so yeah, my big one is really just like live somewhere cheap. Live cheap.
Live cheap. Awesome. I think that's good advice for people, even if they're not creators. Just live below your means. It's great advice.
Yeah.
All right. So once again, where can we find you online?
Twitter at Hope Larson, Instagram at Despair Larson, and my webcomic is solocomic.net.
Awesome, awesome. All right, Hope, thank you so much for coming on, and you have a great day.
Thanks so much for having me. Bye.
So that was Hope Larson, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, go track Hope down online and let her know, especially on her Instagram at Despair Larson, because frankly, I think that is the best Instagram handle I've ever heard. The minute that I saw it, I laughed out loud. And if you like this show, head on over to thebusinessofart.us/iTunes to rate, review, and subscribe today. It's the best way to make sure you don't miss out on any of our awesome episodes. Finally, if you are an author or a creator who wants to make more money selling books, why aren't you a member of our Facebook group yet? Head on over to writingandsellingcommunity.com right now and to join. It's completely free. And there's no fucking promo. Except on select days. And that's it. Wannabes and creators, have a great day. I will see you next time.